Elias had been running for 3 years, 3 months, and 12 days. Not that anyone was counting except him. He had fled across rivers and mountains, through villages that welcomed strangers and forests that swallowed them whole. He had changed his name 3 times. His face was hidden beneath a thick beard he had never bothered to grow before, and his hands, once soft from scribing letters for a minor lord, were now calloused from setting rabbit traps and skinning deer. But no matter how far he ran, the nightmares always caught up. The memory of fire, of screaming, of the lord who had murdered his entire family because Elias had refused to warm his bed. That lord was dead now, killed in a power struggle Elias had no part in, but the habit of running had become a second skin, a poison he could not purge. So when he stumbled into the great northern forest of Jarl Harald Bloodeye, he did what he always did. He kept moving, deeper and deeper, until the trees blocked out the sun, and the only sounds were his own breathing and the crunch of frostbitten leaves beneath his boots. He did not know whose land this was. He did not see the warning signs carved into the ancient oaks. Runes warning of death, of blood price, of the jarl who claimed every living thing within these borders as his own to hunt or spare as he pleased. Elias saw only shelter, only the promise of a rabbit to snare, only another night survived. But the forest had eyes. It always did. The first sign was the silence. One moment the woods were alive with the chatter of birds and the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. The next, everything stopped. No birdsong, no wind. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. Elias froze, his hunter's instincts screaming a warning that his exhausted mind was too slow to interpret. Then he heard it. A horn, low and mournful, echoing through the trees from somewhere behind him. Not a hunting horn. Something older. Something that spoke of ritual and blood and laws carved into stone before his great-grandparents were born. Elias did not wait to learn its meaning. He ran. He crashed through ferns and leapt over fallen logs, his lungs burning, his legs screaming, his only thought to put distance between himself and that terrible sound. Branches lashed his face, thorns tore at his wool cloak. He did not care. He had survived worse. But then he heard the second sound, a voice, impossibly deep, impossibly clear, cutting through the forest as if the trees themselves were speaking. "Don't run." Elias stumbled, nearly fell, caught himself on a mossy rock. The voice had come from everywhere and nowhere, from the ground beneath his feet and the sky above his head. It was not loud, but it was absolute, a command that seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly to the marrow of his bones. "You'll only die tired." For one terrible frozen moment, Elias considered stopping. Every instinct he had developed over 3 years of flight told him that the voice was right, that running had never truly saved him, that it had only delayed the inevitable. But fear was stronger than wisdom, and he had not survived this long by listening to strange voices in haunted woods. He ran harder. And that was when the ground opened beneath him. The pit was old, dug generations ago, lined with sharpened stakes that had long since rotted to blunt points, but were still more than capable of breaking an ankle or impaling a thigh. Elias fell through a tangle of branches and dead leaves, hit the muddy bottom with a sickening crunch, and felt something tear in his left knee. Pain exploded through his leg, white-hot and nauseating, and he bit down on his own fist to keep from screaming. Above him, the circle of sky grew dark with silhouettes. Men on horseback, at least a dozen of them, their faces hidden behind helms and fur-lined hoods. They carried torches that cast dancing shadows across the pit walls, and they looked down at him the way farmers look at a trapped fox, curious, calculating, utterly without mercy. "I told you not to run." The voice was the same one from the forest, but now it was attached to a body that descended from one of the horses with a grace that seemed impossible for a man of his size. He was enormous, easily 6.5 feet, with shoulders that strained the seams of his leather tunic, and arms corded with muscles that looked carved from oak. His hair was dark, streaked with gray, and fell in tangled ropes past his shoulders. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but above it, Elias saw the eye, the single eye, because the other was gone, hidden beneath a leather patch that had been tooled with intricate runes. And that one remaining eye was not brown or blue or green. It was red. Not bloodshot, red, as if the iris had been dipped in rust and fire, as if the man had looked into the heart of a forge and never looked away. Jarl Harold Blood-Eye. Elias had heard the name in taverns and campfires, whispered by travelers who had ventured too far north. They said Harold had sacrificed his own eye to the gods in exchange for the right to rule this forest. They said he could see lies in a man's soul the way other men saw breath on a cold morning. They said he had never lost a hunt. Elias believed all of it now, staring up from the bottom of the pit as the jarl crouched at the edge and looked down at him with that terrible red eye. "What is your name, little fox?" Harold asked. His voice was the same, low, resonant, a sound that seemed to vibrate in Elias's chest. Elias's throat was too dry to speak. He tried to push himself up, but his knee screamed in protest and he collapsed back into the mud. "I asked you a question." Harold's tone did not change, but something in the air shifted. The men on horseback grew still. The torches flickered. "Elias," he finally managed, the words scraping out of his throat like gravel. "My name is Elias." "Elias," Harold repeated, tasting the name as if it were unfamiliar. "That is not a northern name. You are a long way from home, Elias, and you are in my forest, my hunting grounds. Every tree, every stone, every creature that walks or flies or crawls, all of it belongs to me, including you now." He gestured, and 2 of his men jumped into the pit. They were not gentle as they hauled Elias to his feet, not gentle as they bound his wrists with rope and searched his pockets, finding nothing but a dull knife, a handful of dried meat, and a locket containing a lock of hair from a sister he would never see again. They lifted him out of the pit and threw him across the back of a horse like a sack of grain, and Elias bit his tongue to keep from crying out as his injured knee banged against the horse's flank. The ride to Harold's Hall took less than an hour, though it felt like a lifetime. The forest gave way to a cleared valley, and in the center of that valley stood a longhouse larger than any Elias had ever seen. Its roof supported by beams carved into the shapes of serpents and wolves. Smoke rose from a central chimney, and the sound of laughter and music drifted through the walls. But the laughter died when the riders approached, and the music stopped. Every head turned to watch as Elias was dragged from the horse and thrown onto the packed earth floor of the hole. He landed on his side, his knee screaming, his hair plastered to his face with sweat and blood. Torchlight washed over him, revealing the faces of warriors and thralls, women and children, all staring at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Then Harold entered, and everyone looked away. The jarl walked to his high seat, a massive chair carved from the skull of a whale, cushioned with bear fur, and sat down heavily, his one red eye never leaving Elias. "Bring him closer," Harold commanded. 2 guards hauled Elias to his feet and dragged him to the foot of the high seat, then forced him to his knees. The pain in his leg was so intense that black spots danced across his vision, but Elias refused to close his eyes. He had spent 3 years running from men like this. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him weep. "You ran," Harold said, leaning forward, his massive forearms resting on his knees. "That was your first mistake. The second was running deeper into my forest instead of back the way you came. But the third was the most foolish of all." He stood, and the hole seemed to shrink around him. He descended the steps of the dais and crouched in front of Elias, so close that Elias could smell the mead on his breath, the pine sap on his clothes, the iron tang of old blood that seemed to cling to him like perfume. "You looked at my warning runes on the trees, and you did not stop," Harold murmured. "You heard my voice, and you did not listen. You felt the ground change beneath your feet, and you did not turn back. Do you know what that makes you, Elias?" Elias shook his head, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. "Prey," Harold said. "The most dangerous kind, the prey that does not know it is being hunted until it is too late. But I am not an unreasonable man. I do not kill without purpose, and I do not punish without explanation. So I will give you a choice, the same choice I give every fool who stumbles into my woods." He stood and walked back to his high seat, settling into it like a king upon a throne. "My hunters will take you back to the forest at dawn. They will give you a 1-hour head start. Then I will release 3 of my best trackers, men who have hunted wolves and bears and On one memorable occasion, a troll that had been eating the village's sheep. If you survive until sunset without being caught, you are free to go. I will give you supplies, a horse, and safe passage to the southern border. But if you're caught, and you will be caught, then you belong to me, not as a thrall, not as a slave, as something else entirely." Elias's blood ran cold. "What something else?" he whispered. Harold's red eye gleamed in the torchlight. "My companion, my responsibility, my possession in the oldest sense of the word. You will sleep in my chambers, eat at my table, and accompany me wherever I go. You will not be harmed, not unless you harm yourself by running again, but you will not be free either. You will be mine." It should have sounded like a nightmare, and perhaps it was, but there was something in Harold's voice, something in the way he said the word mine, that made Elias's stomach flip with something other than fear. He had been running from one lord's desire for 3 years, and now he had fallen into the hands of another. But this lord did not look at him with hunger of the flesh, at least not yet. Harold looked at him the way a falconer looks at a wild hawk, assessing whether it can be tamed, whether it is worth the effort. "I accept," Elias said, because he had no other choice. "But I will not make it easy for you. I have survived worse than your hunters." Harold smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "We shall see, little fox, we shall see." Dawn came gray and cold, a mist hanging over the forest like a shroud. Elias's knee had been bandaged by an old woman who did not speak a word of his language, and she had given him a leather brace that made it possible to walk, though running was still agony. He had been given nothing else, no food, no water, no weapon, just the clothes on his back and the brace on his leg. The hunters, 3 men who looked as if they'd been carved from the same frozen rock as their jarl, stood at the edge of the clearing, waiting. Harold himself was there, mounted on a massive black stallion, his red eye fixed on Elias with an intensity that made the young man's skin crawl. "You have 1 hour," Harold said. "Use it wisely. The forest is not kind to those who do not respect it." Then he raised his hand and a horn sounded, the same mournful note Elias had heard the day before, and Elias turned and limped into the trees. He did not run. He could not run. His knee would not allow it. So he walked, quickly but carefully, using every trick he had learned in 3 years of fleeing. He stepped on rocks to leave no footprints. He broke branches to create false trails. He waded through a stream to mask his scent, shivering as the ice-cold water soaked through his boots. For the first 2 hours he thought he might actually have a chance. The forest was vast and he was small, and the mist concealed his movements. But then he heard the baying of hounds, and his heart sank. They were using dogs. Of course, they were using dogs. There was no outrunning a dog on a wounded leg, no outsmarting a nose that could follow a scent through running water and over stone. Elias had been a fool to think he could win. He was not a warrior. He was not a hero. He was just a broken man who had been running for so long he had forgotten how to stand still. He found a fallen log and sat down, his back against the mossy bark, and closed his eyes. The baying grew louder, closer, until he could hear the panting of the hounds and the crunch of boots on leaves. "Don't run," the voice had said, and this time Elias listened. When the first hunter burst through the undergrowth, his axe raised and his face twisted with the thrill of the chase, he found Elias sitting calmly on the log, his hands folded in his lap, waiting. The hunter stopped, confused. "You're not going to run?" he asked, lowering his axe. "What would be the point?" Elias said, "Your dogs found me. Your jarl warned me. I should have listened yesterday, but I was too afraid to hear the truth. Running never saved me. It only made me tired." The hunter stared at him for a long moment, then laughed, a short barking sound. "You're a strange one," he said. "Come on, the jarl will want to see you." They did not tie his hands. They did not drag him. They walked beside him, the dogs padding ahead, guiding him back through the forest to the clearing where Harold waited. The jarl had dismounted and was standing by a fire, a cup of mead in his hand. When he saw Elias approaching, not limping in defeat but walking upright, his chin raised, his red eye widened slightly. "You gave up," Harold said. There was no mockery in his voice, only curiosity. "I did not give up," Elias replied, stopping a few feet from the jarl. "I stopped running. There is a difference. Your voice told me yesterday, 'Don't run, you'll only die tired.' I did not understand then. I thought it was a threat. But it was not, was it? It was a warning, a gift. You were trying to save my life." Harold was silent for a long moment. Then he set down his cup and walked to Elias, stopping so close that Elias could feel the heat radiating from his massive body. "You are the first," Harold said quietly, "in 20 years who has understood that." He reached out and touched Elias's face, his scarred fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "The others who came into my forest, they ran until their hearts burst or their legs broke. They died in the mud, screaming my name, cursing me with their last breath. But you sat down, you waited, you listened." His thumb brushed across Elias's lower lip. "Do you know what that means?" Elias's heart was pounding again, but this time it was not fear. It was something else, something he had not felt in 3 years. It felt like hope. "Tell me," he whispered. "It means you are not prey," Harold said. "It means you are something I've been looking for my entire life. Someone who knows when to fight and when to yield. Someone who understands that survival is not about running forever, but about finding a place worth staying." He dropped his hand and stepped back, and for the first time since Elias had met him, he smiled, a real smile, warm and almost shy. "The terms of our agreement stand. You are mine now, Elias, but I give you my word, you will not regret it. I will protect you. I will provide for you. And if you ever wish to leave, truly wish it, you need only say the word, and I will let you go. No hunt, no punishment, just the road and whatever supplies you need to walk it." Elias should have been relieved. He should have planned his escape route immediately, memorized the layout of the hole, befriended the servants, found the weak points in Harold's defenses. But instead he heard himself say, "What if I do not want to leave?" Harold's red eye blazed. "Then you stay, and we learn each other. Slowly, carefully. There is no rush, little fox. You have been running for so long. Now you may rest." He extended his hand. Elias looked at that massive scarred palm, at the calluses and the old bloodstains that no amount of washing could remove. He thought of the lord who had killed his family, who had looked at him with hunger and cruelty. He thought of the 3 years of running, of the cold nights alone, of the faces he would never see again. And then he thought of a voice in the forest, telling him not to run, telling him he would only die tired. He took Harold's hand. The jarl's fingers closed around his, warm and strong, and Harold pulled him closer, not roughly but gently, as if Elias were something precious. "Come," Harold said, "let us go home." They rode back to the hole side by side, Harold's massive stallion dwarfing Elias's smaller horse, but the jarl kept his pace slow, matching Elias's comfort. The hole was warm when they arrived, filled with the smell of roasting meat and the sound of a harp being played somewhere in the shadows. Harold led Elias to a private chamber at the back of the longhouse, a room that was clearly his own. The bed was massive, piled with furs, and weapons hung on every wall. But there was also a smaller bed in the corner, newly made, with clean linens and a pillow stuffed with feathers. "I had my servants prepare it for you," Harold said, gesturing to the smaller bed. "You will sleep there unless you choose otherwise. I do not demand anything from you, Elias. Not your body, not your trust, not your affection. Those things must be earned, and I intend to earn them." Elias looked at the small bed, then at the massive warrior standing before him, the man with the red eye and the gentle touch, the man who had given him a choice when no one else ever had. "What if I choose otherwise?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Harold's breath caught. "Then you tell me, clearly, and I will listen." Elias stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He reached up. Harold was so tall that Elias had to stand on his toes, and touch the leather patch that covered the jarl's missing eye. "What happened to it?" he asked. "I gave it to the gods," Harold said quietly, "in exchange for the wisdom to see what others miss. And I think they sent me you." He covered Elias's hand with his own, pressing it against his cheek. The stubble was rough, but his skin was warm. "I have been alone for a very long time, little fox, not lonely. I have my warriors, my people, my hunts, but alone in the way that matters. No one to come home to, no one to hold, no one to—" He trailed off as if he had said too much. Elias understood. He had been alone too, even when surrounded by strangers in crowded taverns, even when walking through villages full of families. He had been running from connection as much as from danger, because connection meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. But Harold was different. Harold had seen him at his worst, covered in mud and blood, trembling at the bottom of a pit, and had not turned away. Harold had offered him a home. "I am tired of running," Elias said, and he meant it. "I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of sleeping with one eye open and a knife under my pillow. If you are offering me a place to rest, then yes, I choose otherwise." He kissed Harold then, rising onto his toes and pressing his lips to the jowls. It was not a perfect kiss. Elias's nose bumped against Harold's cheek, and Harold made a surprised sound that might have been a laugh, but it was real. And when Harold's arms came around him, lifting him as if he weighed nothing, Elias felt something he had not felt in 3 years. Safety. They did not make love that night, not in the way Elias had feared or hoped. Harold simply carried him to the massive bed, not the small one in the corner, and laid him down among the furs, then stretched out beside him and pulled a blanket over them both. "Rest," the jarl said, his arm draped across Elias's waist. "Tomorrow we will talk more. Tomorrow we will learn each other. But tonight you sleep. You are safe, Elias. I swear it on my remaining eye." And Elias believed him. For the first time in 3 years, 3 months and 12 days, he closed his eyes without fear. He did not dream of fire or screaming. He dreamed of a forest silent and still, and a voice that said, "Don't run. Stay." When he woke, Harold was still there, watching him with that red eye, and Elias smiled, a real smile, unpracticed and unguarded. "Good morning, little fox," Harold said. "Good morning," Elias replied, and he did not run. He never would again. The weeks that followed were a slow, careful dance. Harold was patient in a way Elias had not expected from a man who killed trolls and commanded armies. He did not push, he did not demand. He simply waited. They ate together, breaking bread and passing cups of mead across a table that seemed smaller every day. They walked together through the forest, Harold teaching Elias the names of plants and the calls of birds, Elias teaching Harold the southern songs he had learned as a child. They sat together in the evenings listening to the harpist play, and gradually, without either of them noticing, the space between them shrank. The first time Harold kissed him, truly kissed him, with intent and hunger and the promise of more, was 6 weeks after Elias had stopped running. They were standing by the river, watching the sunset paint the water gold and crimson, and Harold had been telling a story about his youth, about the first bear he had killed, and suddenly he stopped mid-sentence and looked at Elias with an expression that made the younger man's breath catch. "What?" Elias asked. "I have been patient," Harold said. "I have been careful. I have given you time and space and every opportunity to leave. But I cannot wait any longer to ask you this. May I kiss you? Not as your captor, not as your master. As a man who has come to care for you more than he thought possible." Elias's heart swelled so full he thought it might burst. "Yes," he said. And Harold kissed him, deep and slow and achingly tender, his hands cradling Elias's face as if he were holding something sacred. They did not go further than kisses that night, or the next, but each touch built on the last, each whispered word of affection shattering another wall Elias had built around his heart. And when, 3 months after that first kiss, Harold finally took him to bed, gentle and reverent and so careful that Elias wept with the tenderness of it, Elias knew he had found something he had never dared to hope for. He had found a home. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the day Elias had fallen into the pit, Harold called his people together in the great hall. The torches blazed, the mead flowed, and the harpist played a song that Elias had written himself, a song about running and stopping and finding something worth staying for. When the music ended, Harold stood from his high seat and walked to where Elias sat at the side of the dais. He knelt, the mighty Jarl Harold Blood-Eye, terror of the north, knelt before the man he had once hunted, and he took Elias's hands in his own. "You came into my forest," Harold said, his voice carrying through the silent hall, covered in mud and fear. "You fell into my trap and looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much running. I warned you not to run, and you did not listen at first. But then you did. You stopped, you stayed, and you saved not only your own life but mine." He reached into his tunic and pulled out a simple silver ring, etched with runes of protection and fidelity. "I offer you this, Elias, not as a thrall, not as a possession, but as my equal. My partner, the one I want beside me for the rest of my days. Will you stay? Not because you must, because you choose to." Elias's vision blurred with tears. He thought of the man he had been, the runner, the hider, the one who had believed that safety was a lie and love was a trap. He thought of the voice in the forest, the warning that had saved his life. And he thought of Harold, patient, gentle, fierce, and utterly, completely his. "Yes," he said, and he pulled Harold to his feet and kissed him in front of everyone. The hall erupted in cheers so loud they shook the rafters, and when Elias finally pulled back, laughing and crying at the same time, he looked into Harold's one red eye and saw his entire future reflected there. He had stopped running, he had listened to the warning, and it had saved not only his life, but his soul.